WBLS HD1, New York.
Welcome to another edition, or I should say a very special edition, of MLK Day, Martin Luther King Jr. In 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated by a lone gunman's bullet while he was standing there fighting for the rights of sanitation workers. And we should not forget that day, because that's a day that significantly has changed America. It's a day that all of us have to reflect on. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do something that's never been done before. We're going to try to build a bridge and close the gap between individuals that we respect so much. That's the community and the NYPD. We're going to do something that's never been done before. In studio with me today, I have Roy Richter, the president of the Police Endowment Association, the Captains Endowment Association. He's been president of the NYPD Police Captains and Above for the past 8 years. I have Ed Mullins, who's president of the Sergeants Benevolent Association. He's been president of the organization for the past 13 years. I have Tony Herbert, community activist, who's been out there in the streets of Brooklyn and throughout the city of New York for the past 25 years, fighting for the voiceless, for those that cannot fight for themselves. And you know who I am. I'm Norman Seabrook, president of the New York City Correction Officers Benevolent Association. And we're going to have this dialogue and we're going to have this conversation for the next hour. And if you want to join the conversation, please feel free to give us a call at 212-545-1075. That's 212-545-1075. And we'll go to your calls. If you wish to send me an email, send it to normanseabrook@me.com. And I'll read your email online. But before we get started, let's get a conversation and opening remarks from the people around on the panel here. Let's start with Roy Richter, the president of the Police Captains Endowment Association. Roy?
Good afternoon, Norm. Happy to be here. Happy MLK Day.
Thank you for coming, brother. I really appreciate that.
Looking forward to a good conversation today.
Well, it's going to be a hell of a conversation, because if we don't have the conversation, there is no conversation. And I want people to understand that. You know, having the police captains in the same room, the police sergeants in the same room, and we're waiting for calls from other members of law enforcement that represent the men and women in the city of New York. We are all on the same page of music together. We want a safer city, a better city, but we must have a dialogue with each other to be able to communicate with each other. So, Roy, go ahead, continue. I'm sorry, brother.
I got to tell you that the NYPD does an excellent job keeping the city safe. I was comparing some numbers, and unfortunately it comes down to a lot of numbers, which doesn't talk about the lives that the New York City Police Department helps and saves. And you compare us up against Chicago, Los Angeles, and we're number one so far as the best place to live in America.
No doubt about that. Let's go to my brother, Ed Mullins, Sergeants Benevolent Association. Good morning, Ed. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Norm. I want to thank you. I think this is a great idea you put together, BLS. Much needed event to happen. I also want to wish the family of Martin Luther King a great day. I was just with Bernice King on Thursday, his niece Alveda King, and Bernice made a speech in Texas. And at the end of his speech, she said, "Happy birthday, Daddy," which I thought was the most important word she said, because she humanized the events of Martin Luther King. She connected him as a family member. And when you think about that, I had a birthday the day before, to which my kids said, "Happy birthday, Daddy." So when you look at everything that's transpired, what do you take from it? What's occurring is all about people. And this conversation and what you and I discussed previously is much needed, and hopefully will begin to heal a process of law enforcement and community across the nation.
And long overdue. Let me go to my brother to my left over here, Tony Herbert, community activist for the past 25 years. Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, I'll be celebrating my 26th birthday coming up.
You're not 26 years old, bro.
No, I'm actually honored to have this opportunity, one, to get the phone call from you to be involved in in such a very important dialogue. I mean, in reality, we have to be able to bring our community together. And community does speak to residents as well as those that serve us here in the city. And we've got to be able to have the dialogue to move us forward and whatnot, because there are people that are outside of this city that would love to see us falter so that they can move in and destroy more lives, and we can't afford to have that.
And we can't allow that to happen. So let's get started with the conversation. Let me just ask a conversation. And Tony, you're in the community, and you see it when a young person is shot and killed,
right?
When someone shoots or discharges a firearm, ending the life of a police officer or law enforcement officer involved in an incident, ending the life of someone else. What are the boots on the ground saying? What do you think the people in the community are upset about, and how do we, in your opinion, go forward?
I've had a lot of dialogue with people, and over the years, my background. I've worked for city council, I worked in the state senate, I worked for a congressman, so I understand politics. And what the message that has to be clear, quite frankly, is that our police officers are here to do a job. We have bad cops, we have bad preachers, we have bad teachers. It has to be rectified through a due process that exists in every field of endeavor. But when it turns around and you talk about pitting police officers against our community, that's the city's job. That's what the city does, because they're using our officers. And I say this, I said it on CNN, I said it on a couple other media outlets. At the end of the day, the city uses our officers as modern day tax collectors. They put them out there, and naturally the aggression they're going to face that aggression. So we're seeing that, we're getting that, and we're feeling that. But the people in our community need to understand that this is the measure of what we're dealing with. It's not like the police are out there to say, okay, I just came here to make your life miserable. Now I've got a job to do. And it's relevant based on what you've seen of late in the newspapers. When they say that police caused a slowdown or they started a slowdown, when you move our resources to go deal with protesters and stuff like that, naturally the community is going to suffer, because now we don't have the resources there to do their job. However, at the same time, then you talk about dollar amounts that's associated with writing tickets and all that stuff. The writing is on the wall. It's about money in our city, and people are being used for that purpose, and that's where the aggression comes from. And that's where we have to create that balance. Look, officers are doing their jobs. There might be some, and they're human too, before they put the uniform on. So I'm not defending anybody. I'm just saying the reality is we have to look beyond the stupidity and recognize this is all political.
Well, just like I say with the correction officers, 99% of us do what we're supposed to do every single day. There is 1% of us out there that wear the badge or wear the uniform that shouldn't have the badge or the uniform or the gun, because they're just not part of the team of making it go forward. And the media focuses on that 1%. And as president of the Sergeants Benevolent Association, your group of men and women are the first line supervisors when something happens in the city of New York. What is your, direction, or what is your hopes of your membership doing as far as communities are concerned throughout the city of New York?
Great question, Norm. And Tony, I totally agree with you. You're bringing up about summons activity. Ironically, we talk about how much activity is generated by each officer, but we don't calculate how many times an officer stops, warns and warns and instructs an individual, and lets them go, which we do have the ability to do that. And that's a policy that I am going to be pushing for as we go forward in the NYPD, because it's our first interaction with the public is generally through a car stop or some type of traffic violation. And it's all based on money. They'll tell you there's no quotas. There's quotas. You know it. I know it. The public knows it. As sergeants in the NYPD, what I am trying to do is get my members to lead the younger officers and detectives, and they become lieutenants and captains and inspectors and chiefs as we go forward. The sergeants today have the ability to change the culture at the NYPD going forward. And what needs to change is leadership, character, instill values, and a belief in what you do as a pride factor. And I always go back to the United States Marines, and I was never a Marine. But in wartime, they never have a shortage of people signing up to join the Marines. Why is it that they continuously get more and more individuals to join in comparison to everyone else, and they never use the words join the Marines? Because they believe in what they do. There's a certain character that's built within. They get the training. We see soldiers in Afghanistan, Iraq, talking to people saying, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, sir, no, sir. And here in a civilized world, going to what you said, 99% of, the police and correction and employees do what's right. They do the right thing. But that one individual causes an interaction that the whole city looks at, and then it gets magnified. So why in the uncivilized world can we speak so professionally, and in a civilized world we have someone who doesn't? And what it comes down to is training and education and a belief in what we do. And sergeants have the ability to change this culture, and we're going to push for that as it goes forward.
212-545-1075. You give us a call and tell us what you think. Roy, listening to Ed Mullins, the Sergeants Benevolent Association's president, talking about leadership and talking about being able to institute policy and procedure that's going to change the way police sergeants, and he expects his members to act in the public. What would you say to your precinct commanders, because you're the head of the individuals that handle the precinct? Your job as president of your organization is you've got the mothership. It's your precinct. It's your command. What are your thoughts?
Well, one of the issues that people are trying to wrap their arms around is I worked in the city of New York in the late 80s and the early 90s, and it was a different place to live, different place to work. And how can we have made the city so much safer over the last couple of decades as we have? I mean, you've been around a long time and you know the difference. But that's all perception. One of the problems, I think, when we look back is we had a problem where we lost confidence in our police officers on the street. And that happened over the last 10 to 15 years. And we have to instill more confidence so that they can actually make decisions on the street and take initiative, which is an important thing for a police officer that interacts with the community. And when I talk about that, the big problem we had with is CompStat was a big benefit for us. It changed the dynamic of the police department. It changed the dynamic of policing in New York City and in America. But at the same time, it had hazards and radioactive fallout that put us in the position we're in now. When you look at a couple of years ago, when you had over 750,000 stops in New York City, and then you compare it now, we have like maybe 40,000 annually. What was going on at that time? And one of the problems going on at that time was that there were bright ideas in the police department that they said, we need data, we need numbers of people stopped, and they said, let's create a database to identify all people that are stopped, all genders, all races, all ethnicity, and populate this database with names so it'll assist us in investigating crimes in the future. Now, I grew up in Brooklyn. I can tell you that I've been stopped a couple times. I'd be hard pressed, or I'd be a little concerned about myself as a kid to all of a sudden find myself in a police database at that time. And there was some legislation that was introduced to correctly make that unlawful to have this database. But during that time, you had police officers, sergeants, lieutenants out on overtime, and they were allowed to come back with stops. So instead of actually seeing a crime, making an arrest, seeing an infraction, issuing a summons, they are actually able to come back and give a number of stops based upon reasonable suspicion. So human nature is what it is. When you're an officer out on patrol and you're on overtime and you have to come back with a certain number of activity or a piece of activity, and that's a stop, that means that, given somebody's articulation, there's a lot of bad encounters with the public that they wouldn't have had to begin with. So when you had that type of activity and those large numbers, 750,000 stops of stop, question, and frisk forms filled out in a year, that's a hell of a lot of stops.
Too many. Let's go to our first caller. Caller, what's your name? Where you calling from?
Yes, I'm calling from Staten Island, New York.
Okay, what's your question? You have the panel up here, and we're talking about race relations and how to make it better between the police department, corrections, and the city of New York. What's your thoughts?
Yes, well, it's not so much of a question, but it's more of a statement. I would just like to, touch on the fact of what was said before pertaining to the police being more or less like tax collectors, money collectors. Basically, what I've been experiencing being a driver in New York City, I've been seeing a lot of the traffic laws, the same ones that they uphold and press to give us tickets for, that not only do they break, but see, when it comes down to that, I don't see it to be fair that the same laws that they uphold are the same ones that they are breaking merely just to obtain this quota. Okay, not only that, but I just think it, to be fair, that if whether it be within their ranks or within the precincts, that if they see laws being broken by their own rank and file, that they should be reported and that they should be upheld to the same laws that we, the public citizens, the taxpayers, are held to. Now, mind you, we are the ones that are, putting up a portion to pay their salaries. Are we not?
Okay.
So let's treat everybody equal under the same laws.
Okay, let me get a response from the police, from Roy Richter, who's the president of the Police Captains Endowment Association. Roy?
I think New York City police officers overwhelmingly obey the law and police in a positive manner. Insofar as receiving summonses, it's for an infraction. There's an infraction that's done, and there's a summons that's issued. I think you want a police officer to enforce red lights. You want a police officer to make the double park cars move, because you need traffic to move safely, and you need people to be safe walking the streets.
Okay, let me go to the next caller. Next caller, where you from? Your name and where you're calling from.
Good afternoon.
Good
My
afternoon.
name is Joyce Dennis.
Say again, I'm sorry.
My name is Joyce Dennis.
Hello, how are
I'm
you?
calling from Brooklyn.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, what's your question?
My question is, there seems to be, I'm not sure if I can come up with the correct phrase, but a desire to turn people who are Muslim into suspects. And I realize that in the news there is a broad scare, there is terror being created by some people. But what does that have to do with Brooklyn? What does that have to do with particular individuals like myself, who is Muslim, who are being surveilled by the NYPD? And I'm not sure how or why or what is the exact reason.
Okay, let me.
But I do recall.
Okay, let me ask the president of the Sergeants Benevolent Association. The sister's calling, and she's suggesting that, and I'm interpreting it this way, that she, as a Muslim, and other Muslims are being targeted by the NYPD.
Great question, and you personally should not feel that you're being targeted by the NYPD just because you're Muslim. The NYPD, law enforcement across the country, historically does investigations based on particular groups of people who are committing particular types of crimes. For example, if we go back into the 80s and early 90s, the Italian-American culture would say that they were targeted, and it was a huge focus on organized crime, to which at that time was focused within that particular culture. This has changed. We've had Asian gangs. In the case of terrorism, we've been experiencing terrorism through people who are from within Middle Eastern backgrounds and within that type of a culture. So although you may feel that way, it's understandable. Try to bear with the circumstances that are occurring, because in the long run, the game plan is to make a safe environment, a safe city for all people in the city.
And let's go to the next caller. Your first name and where you're calling from.
Hello?
Yes, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Anthony Bell. I'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead, sir. Ask your question.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to say I find that the police were really disrespectful to the mayor towards his concerns about his African-American son. And that was really disrespectful to the public, I think, as well as the mayor. Because you turn your back on the mayor for his concerns about his child. What do you think you're doing to us as the citizens of the United States, of New York City? You're turning our backs on us, especially African-American. We're African-American. My question to you is, do you think that you're hiring these police officers that are too fast, that doesn't have the experience? Do you think that they need some more training as far as dealing with the public, dealing with people? Maybe you should put them out there on the streets and deal with the public. This way they'll have firsthand knowledge on how to deal with people, with young people, young energetic people who love doing things, creative people, and then, dealing with mentally disabled people, as well as intoxicated people.
Okay.
I mean, the police right now, they're so tired. You know, the ones that have been there for years and years and years, I feel that they're so tired and they're so frustrated that they don't know what to do. And you have so many young cops out now that you're hiring that are really scared. These police officers are scared, and you give them a gun, and you put them in these places where there's high crime areas. Obviously, they're going to draw their gun. They don't mean to
Okay,
kill people all the time.
you've asked two questions, and I want the panel to be able to have the opportunity to answer and give all three the opportunity to answer. And your first question is, do you think that it was disrespectful for the police officers to turn their back on the mayor when the mayor was talking about having a conversation with his son Dante? And the second part to the question was more or less, you put these young officers out here who are scared to be in the community. So it's to the panel. Ed, Roy, come on. Tony, do you think that it was disrespectful for police officers to turn their back on the mayor of the city of New York?
My opinion in that whole circumstance, and I said it before, honestly, I think people have the right to express themselves in whatever form they'd like. There is freedom of speech. I mean, if you understand the laws that permit the police department, and you guys could elaborate more too, with the Taylor law that doesn't allow you to go out there and strike or anything along that vein. What else do you have but to show your dismay for something that you're disgruntled with? So turning your back on that particular mayor, but they turned it on the mayor, but they didn't turn it on everybody else. So it sent a message clearly to me that there's an issue between them and the mayor, and that was their way to resolve it. I don't think they disrespected that police officer. I think he would have stood and did the same thing in unity.
Second part to the question, do you think that the mayor had the right to have a conversation with his son about policing?
Totally. I mean, I have a conversation with my kids, but I don't tell them to be fearful. I just tell them what they need to do. If you're in a vehicle, and I want to say this to everybody else, and what have you, do not resist. If you're in a vehicle and you turn around, you turn on the lights, you put your hand on the dashboard, clearly roll down all the windows, and that's all you have to do. Don't make any sudden moves. Don't do anything stupid to create an atmosphere and what have you that will get you hurt. That's what you have to do.
Okay. Ed?
I totally agree with Tony. I think that the question that's being asked is one that is perceived throughout the city of New York, and one that we need to address as a whole in order to build these bridges we're talking about here today. New York City police officers, as Norm said earlier, 99%, the NYPD is truly trying to make communities of all colors safe. And unfortunately, that in the process of doing that, we're going to encounter good people and bad people, and regardless of the community, that's going to happen. There's going to be tensions. There's going to be dangers. And just like, you're describing events within a community of someone being fearful of being stopped in a car, an officer has to use certain tactics, which Tony is just describing, helps to alleviate tension. We need to not only train and educate the police, we need to train and educate the public so that we're able to work together. We're all on the same side, because in the end, I think we all want the same thing, a safe society.
Right.
But before you do that, there are people that benefit for keeping us at odds with each other financially. And that's the problem and what have you. We've got to be able to disseminate the information. No, I'm not standing here saying that I'm in defense of the police department, and I'm not saying I'm in defense of the community. I'm in defense of what's right. And what we have to do is do what's right in order to be able to be a successful working along with each other kind of community.
Okay. Roy, go ahead.
So where do I start? Let's see. Insofar as I got to tell you, I was 20 years old. I came on a New York City Police Department. Grew up in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and my first assignment was in Brownsville, East New York. And I did a lot of learning. In that time, I had an awful lot of positive community interactions, and I had an awful lot of really negative community interactions. But I grew with experience and with the people that they put me with, that I was able to make judgment calls, and I was backed up by the police department that I served, and I believe by the people. Insofar as communities that we grow up in, I have 3 children, and I try and prepare them to be out there by themselves and survive and make positive and good decisions. But one of the things that I don't hear spoken too much is, I got to tell you, my kids go to public school, and I know there's kids in different areas in New York City that go to public school. My kids don't go through metal detectors to get to class. That's not a police department issue. That's in different areas of New York City. My kids don't go home at night and they have floodlights on outside with generators buzzing all night long. And I think that children in New York City grow up differently depending on where you live and who you are, and that's a big challenge.
Okay, so how do we start a dialogue of communicating with each other to ensure that we move forward? And let me say this. I believe, this is only my opinion, that a police station is an alien spaceship, because the children that grow up in communities only see two things that happen in a police station. Either somebody's going in with handcuffs on or somebody's going in to file a report against somebody. It's not as friendly as the fire department, if you will. You don't get to pet the dog. You don't get to ride on the truck. You don't get to hit the horn and go beep, beep. You don't get to do any of that. So I think that we need to start with a dialogue of how do we re-educate our children to understand that in order for us to move forward, we've got to start. Now, maybe some people are too old to have new ideas, but if we get to the young and start with them, we'll be able to change the way some people feel about us, because I believe at the end of the day, when you call 911, you want somebody to come help you. They don't ask what color you are. They don't ask, are you gay? Are you straight? Are you black? Are you white? They're coming to try to help you. But the community have got to understand, we've got to understand and bridge a gap with each other, because you can't have two groups of people not communicating with each other. So we got to start someplace. Go ahead, jump in here, wherever you want.
No, you're on target once again. I'm going to say that we started in Dallas on Martin Luther King's birthday with the Reverend T.D. Jakes and Reverend Jackson. We had this conversation. I threw out things that I said we will do here in New York, and that New York, in my view, being the capital of the world, would be the model that can be taken across the country. And I think that, as I said on Thursday, that we can do it here in New York. We could do it from right here at this table by having a voice and having reasonable dialogue and talking to the people of the city of New York, because there are things that we can do. We can implement the sports programs within the NYPD that builds the bridges within the communities. We can do that. We can look at the issue of summons quotas and make some changes to that so we gain trust going forward. We can tie components where we work with corporate partners and show the economic development to a child so they see an end product of it. We can increase the leadership roles in what people in the community do and with people in the NYPD do, so that there are models going forward. There's a lot we can do, but we got to not talk about it. We got to not fight about it, and we got to start working on it.
And do something about it. 212-545-1075, 212-545-1075. Next caller, first name and where you're calling from.
Hi, my name is Terry Williams, and I'm calling from Greenburgh, New York. My question is this. If there's only 1% bad cops, why don't the 99% of good cops turn into bad ones?
Good question. There you go, to the sergeants or to the police captain.
Great question, and believe it or not, that happens quite frequently. We are held in the NYPD to standards that most agencies across the country aren't held to, and we're held to accountability even off duty when we are not working in the confines of the New York City area, and we're held to a different accountability. The population of the NYPD of 35,000 police officers in itself is a watchdog of each other, and it happens on a daily basis.
Next caller, first name and where you're calling from. Next.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Rudolph Muhammad. And my question is this. How can there be honest, sincere dialogue, about an issue where there's no honest, sincere trust and respect for the people that are being policed by the people that are policing?
Okay.
You have another problem is you have young people expected to uphold these standards that have no life history at all of dealing with people fresh out of their mother's house, but you're expecting them to uphold standards of values of a community, and they have no life experience in dealing with people themselves. So
all right, Mr. Rudolph, yeah. I don't want to cut you off. I want you to stay on because you asked an excellent question, and we're going to give people a chance to respond to you, and you'll have a chance to respond as well. Fair enough? Is he still there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, stand by. Go ahead.
Well, one, I really want to just go back real quick, and then I want to address Mr. Rudolph. the concern that we have is that there are opportunities for us as a community to be involved with the police department. There's the precinct council meetings that take place, and that's where we need to go and hold everybody accountable. If you have low attendance and no one's there pushing or asking the questions to move things to action, we don't get the resolve because there's no interest. So you have to go to the precinct council meetings. Every precinct in the city of New York has a council president, but too often they politicize it, and the individuals and whatnot that are in the leadership and what have you don't bring back the information necessary and don't ask the tough questions to get things done. That's one of the biggest problems. So again, community fails in order to move our agenda forward so we can be in control of what happens in our community.
So how do we address Mr. Rudolph's comment or statement about respecting each other? Where do we start?
Well, it starts in the house. I'm sorry. There's no excuse for a child walking out of a door.
Let's say there's nobody in the house, Tony. Let's talk about the reality of it is that we got these gangs out here. We got the Bloods, the Crips, the Kings. We got the 7s, the 8s, the 9s. We got it all going on. Mm-hmm. Nobody's in the house. How do we develop a relationship so that we can stop being each other's enemy and work together to accomplish something? How do we do that?
We have leadership in our society. We have elected officials that supposedly finance and support programs.
Don't do nothing either.
Well, then we might as well cease to exist because, quite frankly, we're damned at that point.
Okay, Ed?
I think we start here. I think what we do is we need to acknowledge what has been occurring, stop beating it to death, and start fixing it.
Right.
And the issue of establishing trust can only come in time. No one, you meet a total stranger in the street today, you don't trust them. But 5 years from now, it may be your best friend. Trust is established over time through a consistent relationship. And we utilize sports for the kids to give them a place to go, and with police officers mentoring them and law enforcement mentoring them and some of your members.
Absolutely.
They mentor them and they teach them so that latchkey kid isn't going home by himself. He's got a coach. He's got somebody to look at, not the Crips and the Bloods and those types of people.
Roy, go ahead. I'm sorry.
We've got a great program out there called the Police Athletic League, but at the same time, when they talk about their success, they have 42 PAL stations throughout the city of New York, but that's just 42 that service a city of over 8 million people. So to the extent that there's a program that exists that is one that works and is one that involves the community and your young people who you want to attract, why can't we find funding and actually expand that?
Exactly. Let me thank you, Mr. Rudolph, for your call. Next caller, where you calling from? I'm sorry.
Well, I want to make a comment to the gentleman that you have there. I think you're all being very biased. Policemen, talk up for policemen. But like one of your previous callers said, most of the police are nice. And the ones that are not, you got to know who they are. And you need to get them out. And you need to get them out to some of those squad cars out on the street like they used to be. When I was 10 years old, when I came to New York, policemen were all over the place. We liked them. They liked us. They were friendly. And as far as them getting mad with Mr. de Blasio talking to his son about if the police pull you over, why would you get angry about that? And I think turning their backs on Mr. de Blasio and some of their comrades' funeral, I think that's disgusting. That is disrespectful. The gentleman that you have there might agree with me. Turn your back at a funeral? No. My husband was one. And they need to stop saying New York's finest.
Okay, your time is you're absolutely, she's absolutely right as far as what she wants to prevent. But let me say this to you. She is suggesting that the backs should not have been turned on the mayor. That is disrespectful. She is also suggesting that the 1% that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing not remain on the police force. Now, what is your response to her?
I personally understand your passion, and I thank you for your passion and your feeling to what you're describing. I respectfully got to disagree, but don't take that as a negative. We should be able to agree to disagree, and what you're feeling is not a feeling that you are experiencing totally alone as one person in the city of New York. There are other people in the city who feel exactly what you feel. And what we're trying to do today is to provide answers and solutions to move all people of this city forward. So the least that I could leave you with right now is hope to a better day, to which police and community will work jointly together, and we will get past these obstacles that we're all looking at from the past. Because a great deal of what we're talking about from individual police officers is also a result of policies and broken communities. And this is where we need to address the issues in its totality so that every person in this city, in this nation, can pursue the American dream.
Let me do this. One of the callers suggested that the conversation that the mayor had with his son, was a private conversation, that it shouldn't have been taken out of context, however you want to describe it. I have 2 daughters, and I've told my daughters I don't want them in certain communities. Mm-hmm. I don't want them in certain clubs. I don't want them in certain places. As us being parents, that is our responsibility to our children. So at the end of the day, if you're upset for trying to keep your child safe, then you know what? I'm wrong, because I'm going to always try to keep my children safe, and so is everybody here. We have to look past that and go, where do we go to make this a better city for policing and for people in the communities? And the people in the community have got to understand they have to stop pulling down the shade and pull up the shade. They have to stop allowing people to come into the communities that don't even live in the communities and destroy the communities. We have to stop watching people mug people, stab people, shoot people, and have this no snitching attitude, because it doesn't change. Mm-hmm. And when you have a culture that continues to think that it's okay to do that, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And we've got to make a change, and we're starting today to make that change. Roy, go ahead, jump in.
One of the issues that I see with our elected leaders right now, and it's a problem that we have. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. But one of the problems we had with is term limits. Now, term limits were terrific insofar as its approach, but what we end up having is we have a city council that their experience in government is being a community organizer and a protester, and now they're leading the city. And we have a whole bunch of legislation that's been passed, and what that legislation does is it basically whacks the head of the turtle, that the turtle ends up putting his head back into the shell. That's not to anybody's benefit. We've got inspector generals, we've got federal monitors, we've got district attorneys, we've got internal affairs, we've got a whole bunch of people out there that will enforce rules as it applies to the police department. But the answer from our legislators should not be adding more rules.
Let's go to a caller. Caller, what's your first name and where you're calling from?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, my name is Ismail. I'm from Queens. I'd like to say we need cops in this city. We can't do without them. That's the first thing. The second thing is the police turn their back on the mayor. There's no excuse for that. These are public servants. When they're in uniform, they have to act a certain way. There is no excuse. There is no protesting. They don't have the right to protest when they're in that uniform and they're on the job collecting a paycheck from our taxes. The third thing is, if the police are policing the police, why is it that the public can't know about which cops are bad? Why don't they start a database, the same way they do with sex offenders, put their pictures up of the cops who have the most complaints in the precinct so the public can go in and see who these cops are and who to look out for, and they will also know who their bad cops are.
Okay, thank you for the call. I'll refer that to the police sergeants and the police captains.
Unfortunately, that's not something that is practical. That would be like taking a person who has done time and continuing to post their photo in a community, labeling them as a life felon or a child predator. It's labeled all over the place. We're hanging his picture in the supermarkets and the train stations. I mean, there's a point here where things get addressed, and police officers do have rights also.
First name and where you're calling from, caller.
Hello, I'm Walter from Brooklyn.
Yes, Walter, go ahead.
Yeah, my biggest concern is that there's no accountability, for police officers. It's like it's a different standard. You have the qualified immunity. You have I think they still have the 48 rule where they don't have to talk to, prosecutors or make a statement. And I understand you guys have to protect your members, as being union reps, but still, in the Gardner case, I'm still like confused how the officers got immunity for testifying before the grand jury, and where if they would have got a subpoena, they would have to testify anyway. So it's just like we have to change these standards, the double standards.
Okay,
the officers have.
Okay, let me go to the panel and ask. Roy, go ahead. You happen to be a lawyer too, don't you?
To my detriment sometimes.
Go ahead, brother.
So, insofar as there is no immunity for police officers, I mean that's it. Insofar as civilian complaints that are lodged against police officers, precinct commanders are held accountable for the officers that they have that have a large number of civilian complaints. And when I say large number, that's not like 10, that's not like 5, that could be like 2 or 1, or what happened to that civilian complaint. And we have a whole process in the precinct as well as in the city that deals with civilian complaints. Insofar as the 48-hour rule or timing insofar as questioning of somebody that's the subject of a criminal investigation, that's something that the district attorney does not want a police officer questioned, because if a police department official is questioning a police officer as a result of an internal investigation where you can get suspended or lose vacation days, and answers come out, then that prosecutor cannot use those answers against the police officer in a criminal prosecution.
Let's go to our next caller. Caller first name and where you're calling from.
Sandy. I'm calling from New Jersey, grew up in Harlem.
Yes, go ahead, Sandy.
First off, in this age of social media, I believe everyone is scared to take off their rainbow-colored glasses and say what's actually real. What people are trying to convey regarding the turning of their backs on the mayor was the reason for the turning of the backs. If we don't look at each other's reality and accept each other's reality, that's the first problem with racism, the people that pretend that it doesn't exist. So the mayor had a conversation that he had to have with his child for being African-American in America and in the city of New York. We are trained differently. There's Blue Nile passages that take boys into teens to young adulthood that teach them how to deal with police. We look at cops. We see that people are treated differently. I see white kids jump out the car and fight with the cops. If you're black, it doesn't happen that way. If you're black, a sudden move will get you shot. So for him having that conversation, Mr. Lynch created the environment of separatism by pretending like he doesn't know that's a reality for people of color. We know profiling exists, racial profiling. So you are training your child different of color. To Norman, to see how we can bridge this gap. As you said, precincts are looked at as scary places, and they shouldn't be. They have to come into our community. The gang unit has to do more than go out and try to suppress and fight the crime of the gangs. Maybe the gang leader just needs a hug, needs someone to talk to him. We need to do it like in Miami. They're shooting mugshots for target practice of African-American males. Well, we need the police to come into the community and do like L.A. police are doing.
All right, sister.
All
right, Sister Sandy. Thank you so much, and you're absolutely right. We have to stop pretending that this doesn't exist, and that's why we have to give credit to Ed Mullins and to Tony Herbert and to Roy Richter. And I just want you to know, with full disclosure, everybody was invited to come to the table. This wasn't no selective. Everybody's been invited to come to the table because in order to have a conversation about race, you have to be a part of it, and we have to be a part of it. It's like I say every single day, I have no use for a correction officer that breaks the law, that jeopardizes the safety and security of every single officer on that island. I have no use for a correction officer that does not want to wear the badge and wear it proudly and be professional about what they do. They talk about, are we for reform? I am for reform if reform is for both sides of it. I am not for reform if it's just to one-sided and it's going to slay one side of it. Next call, and where you calling from? Go ahead.
Brooklyn.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I think the most disrespectful thing I have seen is what they did to the mayor. He never say to the police or disrespect the police. All he said, tell his son, be aware and what's happening, obey the policeman.
Okay, let Roy Richter respond to that. Go ahead, Roy.
So, it's talked over and over again about the disrespect shown to the mayor. But you have to appreciate the anger that police officers had at that point in time when two of our brother officers were assassinated. Like cold-bloodedly, not even like they were down there looking at their lunch.
Absolutely.
And they were assassinated. But in that two-week period prior to that, what was happening in New York City, and I was involved with it directly.
And let's talk about it.
You've had protesters happening, and what was happening with the protest? They were chanting, "What do we want? Dead cops.
Right.
When do we want it now?"
And the media put that on television. Go ahead.
Put that on television. You had public defenders in the Bronx doing rap videos where the videos, they showed pictures of young men pointing a handgun at the head of a police officer, advocating the death of those police officers. Also, you had demonstrations prior to that, and there was a sense of lawlessness because all of a sudden we gave up the bridge, we gave up the highway, we let these protesters run wild. But at the same time, you had police officers being attacked for no reason other than the fact that they wore a blue uniform. I had a police inspector that was policing a peaceful demonstration in Manhattan North, speaking to the parade organizer, a person of the cloth. And somebody came up behind him, saw that white shirt, and clocked him in the head right from behind.
Okay, and in fairness, Roy, and this is a show that we don't sugarcoat anything. In fairness, you had police or what appeared to be police on the other side wearing shirts, and they were arguing back and forth about their demonstration points of it. So how do we go forward? What do we need to do to go forward? And I know, Ed, you said we need to start someplace, and we're starting here today. What do we need to do? Can we come up with an agreement that says, you know what, we're going to do something once a month, wherever it may be, to try to bridge a gap? Because if we just sit here and have this conversation and go away, and then we come back 6 months from now and nothing's accomplished, then we didn't do crap.
And you're absolutely right. And actually, what I was bringing up is you have to appreciate the anger. And I think there's anger on both sides of the table. Mm-hmm. There's anger in the community, and the police have to appreciate that anger. And I think you need to appreciate that there was anger amongst the police force.
Norm, about 15 years ago, Church Avenue in Brooklyn, broad daylight, June, July. Beautiful day, 1,000 people on the street. 2 males, gunned down, right on Church Avenue, about 30 feet apart, on bicycles. Okay. Not one witness in the community, East Flatbush community, predominantly African-American community. I remember at that time I sat back saying to myself, this is unbelievable, not one witness. And then it hit me. The people were afraid to come forward and give information. And that in itself, this is 15 years ago, that in itself is a problem when a community is afraid to talk to the police. Okay, because as the person who was handling that investigation, I wanted to make arrest. I wanted the detectives to make the arrest on that, and so did every other cop that was there. So the problem has been around of mistrust for a period of time. There's 4 people right now at a table to a station that's heard throughout the city of New York. There are a lot of things that we can do, and we can make a commitment right here to do this more frequently, educate the public, put a plan together, and we need to hold public officials accountable. We talk about the turning their backs on the mayor, and it was disrespectful. The First Amendment right, I was there that night, and believe it or not, we're all talking about that being done because of a conversation the mayor had with his son. That had nothing to do with it, okay? But we have city council members who are public officials who protested and did their thing also. But we should hold people accountable in communities of color and ask them what they're doing to help the police.
There we go.
Take down the crime.
All right, let me do this. Roy, you want to read an email I got from Karen Malone? Go ahead, read that email that she sent out so everybody gets an opportunity to have their voice heard.
Building bridges within the communities, enhancing community relations and corporate partnerships, etc., then why is there such disparity in who we put forward to be our voice? We are all asking the same questions, the tough questions, in different forms, but nonetheless asking, why can't we have a sincere dialogue publicly between us and them and just get the job done?
You're listening to a conversation that has never taken place in the city of New York. It's a conversation between members of the NYPD executive staff, sergeants, police captains, you and I, and the community. We're trying to do something that's never been done before. That's bring about a change in conversation, a change that's going to make a difference in this city. If we don't do that, then we're just destined for failure. We must continue to work diligently with each other and get the job done. Now, some of you may not agree with what just happened here for this past hour, but everybody was invited to come, and you're invited to participate. The people that we have on hold would probably be able to take maybe 1 or 2 more calls. And then after we take the 1 or 2 more calls, we'll get ready to wrap up. So let's go to the next caller. Caller, you're up. Got a quick minute. Go ahead.
Yes, hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes, this is Zaki calling in from Brooklyn. What I wanted to say is that I believe that it's a level of responsibility just needs to be taken up upon with the leadership, of the NYPD in terms of like when we say this 1%, and when we say the 1% of the bad cops, you kind of almost say it as if it's to soften the blow, right? And that it's not actually being addressed. Oh, it's only 1%. No, and that 1%, even if it's just that 1% is running amok in communities of color. So, like, what is actually going to happen to actually address that 1%?
That's a good question, and we're going to get to that question. Ed, go ahead.
Again, I think, we're also sugarcoating. It's not just 1% of the NYPD that creates a problem in communities of color.
It's 1% of the community as well.
Absolutely. We have to call it what it is, and we now need to work jointly to fix things going forward. And when you say what is going to be done, we're telling the audience today that something is going to happen, and it's going to happen through education, it's going to happen through training,
Right.
It's going to happen through communication and building bridges. We can condemn the past for months and months to come, but then we achieve nothing going forward.
But I want to ask our community just to take that opportunity. Norm, you gave us a great opportunity here. Now let's ride with this. Let's run with it. Now is the time to change the dynamics in our city. And if you feel that we're not getting the right leadership, then step up, step out, and what have you. Let's do the outreach. Let's reach into the precincts. Let's go and talk with the commanding officers, and let's create the dialogue that's necessary. But sitting back and keep talking about what took place, we can still talk about what happened 400 years ago. Has it changed anything? If we haven't stepped up, we have to step up as a community and take charge of our own leadership.
I think the biggest investment we have to make, and we need to make on an ongoing basis, is in our youth. And it's reaching out to the youth in our communities is where you're going to have success in the future. And if you have the police department involved with that reach out to our communities and our youth, that's where you'll have ultimate success.
I agree. We got to focus on the youth, but I think that everybody needs to work together and move forward. We can debate the past for many, many years to come, but we need to provide solutions, and we need to create accountability to the people who are in charge of leading this city and let the people govern.
So let me just be absolutely clear on this. One of the solutions is that we're going to have is we're going to start a conversation on a regular basis with the NYPD and others from your organization and your organization.
No, I'll be happy to be here with you every week.
And start a conversation and a dialogue on how do we make things better. That's number one, right?
Well, yeah, but what's interesting is we started that process now. So, and I'm happy to say that we have this opportunity. We've met with Chief Jaffe in Community Affairs, and we're starting from that angle with dealing with our youth. We told 600 kids the other day.
We're going to start with the people that represent the men and women on the street. Chief Jaffe she may be a chief, but at the end of the day,
we got to hold people accountable.
We got to hold people accountable.
Well, I speak from the standpoint that
Eddie's on the street,
we're starting the process.
And Roy's on the street, and you know what? Thank God for these guys being on the street. And we're not sugarcoating anything up here. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, we're going to do what we got to do, and we're going to start one block at a time, one community at a time. We're going to make the change that are necessary to be done. I want to thank WBLS 107.5. I want to thank Mr. Livingston. Let me just ask one more question to our listeners. When are you going to make a change? When are you going to stop worrying about yesterday and do something about today and hope for a better tomorrow? May God bless you. May you live as long as you want and never want as long as you live. I'm Norman Seabrook. I'll talk to you soon.